We'll stick with focusing on the first reading. You've been with us the last couple days, or just keeping along with the daily readings. You know, we're walking through the book of Genesis, or some highlights in the stories of the book of Genesis. And yesterday, you remember that it was the day of reckoning for those 10 brothers who sold Joseph into slavery. And you know, we discussed and we looked at of seeing maybe those things that we've maybe pushed away, like those brothers did, and as they come up, to see them as a moment of grace, that moment of reckoning as grace, and Joseph offering that grace, which we see today. Joseph, in this like powerful scene, you know, he invites everyone to leave, and he weeps tears that are so loud. It says, even though he invited and told people to leave the room, he said the Egyptians heard him. The tears were so loud. And then he calls his brothers closer to him. Come closer to me, he told his brothers. And then, you know, he says, I'm your brother, Joseph, whom you once sold into Egypt. And then listen to these words. But now do not be distressed. Don't reproach yourselves. The grace that he's extending here. For having sold me, don't reproach yourselves for having sold me here. And then this line, which we'll just focus on for a minute. He says, it was really for the sake of saving lives that God sent me here ahead of you. What's he referring to? He's referring to being thrown into the pit. He's referring to they being on the caravan and probably being mistreated and spending days without food and being mistreated as a slave and in prison and being falsely accused by all of these things. He says, it was really, don't reproach yourselves. It was really for the sake of saving lives that God sent me here ahead of you. I just want to read just a section from a book that I recently read from Wilfred Stinnison. He was a Carmelite, mid-1900s, and then he founded a small contemplative order. And he says this with regards to God's will and his permissive will. He says, God has everything in his hand. Nothing exists outside the sphere of his influence. Nothing can upset his plans. Augustine formulates this very radically. Augustine says, nothing happens that the Almighty does not will should happen, either by permitting it or by himself doing it. To let something happen is also a decision of God. That is wild. And it's very difficult to hear that and to even accept it and to grapple with it. He goes on, that God allows so much to happen is a great stumbling block for us. Why is he so passive? Why does he not intervene? How is Auschwitz possible, and the torture chamber, and the threat of a horrible nuclear war, if God has concerned with us? Goes on to say, nothing falls outside of God's plan. That is why the tragedy of the world, despite all its terror, has no definitive character. All the absurdity of which mankind's foolishness and blindness are capable is caught up in God's loving omnipotence. He is able to fit even the absurd into his plan of salvation and thereby give it meaning. So again, everything that happens for those of us through the eyes of faith, even if it's not God's, you could say positive will or directed will, it's still his permissive will. He doesn't cause evil to happen. He's not the reason behind the evil, but we know evil happens. All those things that happened to Joseph and thrown in the pit, and we would say those are God's permissive will. It's his permissive will. And maybe one last section here. He says, everything that happens has a purpose in God's plan. Augustine says, God is so good that in his hand even evil brings about good. Who can dare speak of chance, he says. Nothing in our lives happens haphazardly. Everything that takes place against our will can only come from God's will, his providence, the order he has created, the permission he gives, and the law he has established. Wilfred Stinnison, I recommend the book. It's called Into Your Hands, Father, Abandoning Ourselves to the God Who Loves Us. Let us, Joseph, all the bad, the evil that happened to him, and that last line that he says to his brothers, it was really for the sake of saving lives that God sent me here ahead of you. What a powerful work of mercy and grace, and those words from Joseph that he and then he extends to his brother. And the mindset that Joseph has is the same mindset that we're to have, and always abandoning ourselves to the divine will of the God who loves us.